All right, do we have everyone had a chance to read the minutes? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from the September meeting?
I so move.
Seconded.
Seconded by Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes of the September meeting are approved. Director Talbot?
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission, ladies and gentlemen. It has been, again, fairly busy since our last commission meeting, and to give you some highlights of my activities and happenings with the department. Earlier this morning, you heard of the Herrera case. There has been a lot of work done on the Herrera case, and have spent a considerable amount of time working with NGOs, other state agencies, and certainly would like to thank our Attorney General Rep. David DeWald for his outstanding work there. There has been a lot of supporters. There's been almost $100,000 raised to support the amicus brief through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and those folks are too numerous to mention, but I will mention a couple of them. Our partners at Rocky Mountain Elk have stepped up, and then also the guide and outfitting business here in Wyoming has stepped up significantly to help in those efforts. So I'd certainly like to say thanks to those. I went to employee recognition. The governor continues to recognize employees with 20 plus years of service to the state of Wyoming. That is a very rewarding opportunity to sit down with the governor and our employees and visit about their careers and recognize their dedication not only to the state of Wyoming but to the wildlife resources that we all enjoy so much. We as an agency have been very involved with the Senate EPW committee chaired by none other than our John Barrasso. John Kennedy is not here today, preparing for testimony and to appear at that committee later this week, but the department through Brian Nesvik and John Kennedy have testified on several different issues ranging from successful wildlife management, wildlife funding, and technology. So we continue to be very engaged in that effort on a national level. Since our last meeting, we met with Travel, Recreation, and Wildlife, and most recently we provided an update to them on chronic wasting disease, aquatic invasive species, and then migration corridors and the application of the Commission's policy. We'll hear more about that as we move forward. It's been very active legislatively. Our folks have testified on several different committees. We've seen a lot of draft bills, and I would just remind the Commission that there are two draft bills that have come out of TRW. One is on eliminating the waiting period on preference points, the mandatory cancellation of those preference points after 2 years, and there's another draft bill allowing the Commission the authority to regulate methods of take of wildlife, and that has to do with our discussions on technology and how we apply technology. In addition to that, I have met with LSO on several occasions to help draft other legislation for legislators coming up in this next session. And like I said, I think it promises to be a very, very busy legislative session this year. As far as internal communications, myself and staff hosted a webinar with all department employees. The Commission should have received an invite on that, but we talked about current issues as far as the strategic planning process, budget development, the status of the current grizzly bear case, and also grizzly bear conflicts, and then also the Commission and department's application of migration corridor and comments related to that. In addition to that, a lot of communications with the Wyoming State Livestock Board. There are 2 active cases of brucellosis in domestic livestock, one in a single individual in Park County, and then most recently 5 domestic cattle that have been tested positive for brucellosis in Teton County as well. I went and met with the Lincoln County Commissioners and certainly appreciate Commissioner Smith's presence there on discussing with them disposal of animal parts and primarily their concerns about chronic wasting disease and how to handle those parts, whether they be from locker plants or roadkills, what have you. And as you are aware, we have not documented chronic wasting disease in the Kimmer area, but had a discussion with those folks. And I guess just to recap those discussions, currently the most preferred method to dispose of potentially infected animals with chronic wasting disease is in an approved landfill. And so I will be meeting with the County Commissioners Association on the 13th of December here in Casper to discuss that as well. And all landfills in Wyoming are either operated by some municipality or counties. Obviously, they're regulated by DEQ, but each one of those authorities has the licensing authority, not the management authority of those facilities. So we'll be reaching out to them as we move forward with chronic wasting disease. Myself and John Kennedy and several of our communication staff met and talked with Leadership Wyoming and Gillette, gave them an overview about the Wyoming Game and Fish Department and wildlife in Wyoming. That's the first time that we have been on the agenda of Leadership Wyoming to that degree. In the past, our chief, Dee Dee Hawk, has presented to them on our forensics lab, but this was the first opportunity that we've had to visit with them about wildlife in totality. And after that, Rennie and Catherine and others put together a shoot and a little contest for them with shotguns, 22s, and archery equipment there, and I think that they all thoroughly enjoyed that opportunity. Myself and Deputy Director Scott Smith had the opportunity to do presentations at the Western Governors Association on wildlife diseases and also on migration corridors. I had the opportunity to meet the new superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, Mr. Cam Scholey, and hopefully we will continue to have a very positive working relationship with that entity as we move forward. I did host a meeting with several state directors from DEQ, Wyoming Livestock Board, Department of Ag, and Department of Health and others to discuss chronic wasting disease and how we need to move forward as far as proper disposal of carcasses and those types of things. I had the opportunity to visit at the Wyoming Water Association and provide them an update of what's going on with wildlife in Wyoming. Always a very lively crowd with a lot of questions. I also had the opportunity to speak at the book signing of the Migration Atlas in Cheyenne, and as you are all aware, the department has worked in close conjunction with many folks on migration issues in Wyoming, and due to the work of many of those folks in our department, we're clearly ahead of all of the rest of the western states when it comes to documenting migrations and moving forward with that. In addition to that, myself and staff have been very involved in both the Badger Creek fire and the Roosevelt fire, and certainly send our condolences to those folks who lost their homes and their property in that. But we've been very aggressive working with the Forest Service as far as follow-up treatments for cheatgrass, and our folks in Pinedale have been working closely through the governor's office and others to look at ways to mitigate the effects of the Roosevelt fire. With that, Mr. Chairman, I did have the opportunity since our last meeting to go out and enjoy the great outdoors of the state of Wyoming, and two of the reasons that we live here, September and October, and had the opportunity to see one of our commissioners ride a horse through the Washakie Wilderness, and he did a great job at that. But I have had the opportunity to meet with many folks, and the number of compliments and kudos to our folks for their friendliness, their professionalism, and their helpfulness in the field certainly gives us faith that our employees are doing an incredible job. And hunting this year, I can attest, has probably been as good as it's been in a long, long time. And one young Mr. Luke Talbot and one young Mr. John Kennedy both were quite successful in harvesting trophy bull elk this fall. So that even adds to that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I take any questions that you may have.
Any questions for Director Talbot? Thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself, but if anybody would like to speak on any of the topics, Janet Milek back there in the corner has blue sheets. You can fill those out, and there'll be anything on the agenda you want to speak to. And then also at the end of the day, we have a call to the public, and it asks that everybody silence their toys. And that's about it. Thank you. All right, you had the Ray.
President Anselmi, Commissioners, and Director Talbot. It's my pleasure today to give Matt Pollock his 20-year award with the state of Wyoming. You can come on up, Matt, if you want. So a little bit about Matt. Matt started with the department back in 2005. He actually worked at the University of Wyoming before that, which is why he's getting his 20 years. When I first saw Matt, he was actually a teacher at the University of Wyoming in the ag department, and he was working on his PhD, but we were lucky enough to steal him away. So Matt has a BS in ag mechanization, which I didn't even know existed. He also has one in ag education and a master's degree in ag education, and then he was working on a rangeland ecology and watershed management degree when we got him. So, but Matt started with us in 2005. He was a crew leader on our Laramie crew, and then he was promoted over here to the Casper region the same year. Matt is always positive. He's very knowledgeable. I actually worked for Matt early on in my career when I was down in Yoder. We've had some restructuring over the years, and Matt's area of responsibility has shifted a little bit, but now he covers 3 WHMAs, and one of them being our largest, which is Chain Lakes. He also has the Red Rim Daily and Morgan Creek, along with 23 different PAAs along the North Platte River system, stretching from Casper clear down to Orange Junction above Glendo. Matt, in his spare time, is also a varsity football ref and basketball. So he's at all the high schools. So he's got, that everyone's yelling at. So Matt is, he's very dedicated to his job. And it really shows right now with the Chain Lakes and all the oil and gas development we've had. Matt's our on-the-ground guy. He's out there all the time working with those folks, making sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and writing comments for us. So I'm actually really proud to give him his 20-year award, and I appreciate all the work you've done for us.
Thank you. Alan?
Good morning, President Anselmi, Commissioners, Director Talbot. It's my pleasure to present a 20-year service award to Jeff Stafford. Jeff is the superintendent at the Wigwam Hatchery, which is located in Ten Sleep Canyon. So Jeff started his career with the department as a technician at the Spees Hatchery. In 1998, he was promoted to a permanent status at the Tillet Rearing Station, and he served there until 2002 when he went to the Story Hatchery in 2002. During that same year, he was promoted to the assistant supervisor at the Ten Sleep Hatchery. He promoted pretty quickly in 2006 to the hatchery superintendent at Du Bois, and that's the same time when the renovation occurred. So he was the first superintendent at the Du Bois hatchery and had to navigate through all those new systems. Did an exceptional job there. In 2009, he transferred to his current position at the Wigwam Rearing Station. As you know, going through the tours of our hatchery system, it takes a lot to rear fish. It's just not dumping them in a pond or raceway. Our folks raise very high quality fish, and Jeff has been instrumental in that effort within the agency. He's one of our best culturists. Jeff takes the time to do trials at his facilities he's been working at to see what works and what doesn't. And Jeff is a great mentor to our folks that work for him and throughout the whole section, actually. He spends the time to promote his skills to people working under him and coming up. We are very fortunate to have him in our section for the last 20 years, and I think most importantly, congratulations to Jeff being a father this year. So.
Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot, I have the honor today to recognize, it looks like about 85 years of service here between three of our great employees. First, I'll start by a quick shout out for Deb Vincent. She's our office manager, one of our office managers here in Casper, and she decided that she didn't want to come down and be recognized in front of the Commission, but I certainly do want to thank her for her 25 years of service to the state of Wyoming, and about 7 of that to the Game and Fish. She started off with White-Op, but she's a traffic director in the Casper office and does an exceptional job of coordinating and taking care of those folks and supporting the folks that work in the Casper office, and also serving our publics in our one of our largest population centers in the state. So thanks to Deb. We do have here, though, a couple of individuals that we'll have the opportunity to recognize in person. So I would first ask that Senior Game Warden Rod Liebert from Douglas please come on up. So Rod has been with the department since 1988. He started actually, I didn't realize this, but he actually started as a fish guy. And then he saw the light, and he came over to the wildlife side. And in 1989, he became a special deputy game warden. That's what we called him in those days in Green River. And started as a damage control warden in Casper in 1989. He transferred over to be the Douglas game warden in 1994. And that's where he's served ever since. And he's become, because he served there for so long and because he's done such a good job and because he works so hard, he has a tremendous work ethic. He's become quite a fixture in the Douglas community, and he's very well known. He's very well respected by his community, and really he's exactly what we all hope and expect we can have out of those folks that we hire to represent our department as game wardens. He does that extremely well. I was very fortunate. I got to start when I first started. I worked with Rod quite a bit. At the time, they called us baby water wardens, and I worked at one of Rod's waters at Glendo. And anyway, at a very early stage in my career, I had an opportunity to see the work ethic and the professionalism that Rod did his job, and he always has a smile on his face and a good attitude, and people just can't help but like him. So even sometimes, even bad guys like him. So Rod, thank you very much for 30 years of service to the department. And I did want to also mention that he was recognized by one of the one of our most significant awards in the department. As he was recognized in 2006 with the Shakir Safari Officer of the Year, Wildlife Enforcement Officer of the Year award. So congratulations, Rod.
What's that?
Mr. President, and our last service award here this morning is for another individual that has 30 years of service and somebody who is not a stranger to the commission. I would ask the Casper Regional Wildlife Supervisor Brian Olson, please come on up. So, congrats.
Millions.
Brian has quite a diverse career. He's been before many of you, I think probably all of you before, and so you're familiar with him. But I'll give you a little bit of his background, because he kind of started and in one discipline and moved around a little bit, and now he's back in it again. So anyway, he started off in 1988 as a special deputy warden in Sheridan. He then was at that time we had what was called an interpretive specialist. Officially, that was the official term for it. But it was basically an information and education type of a contract or temporary position. He did that in Sheridan, Alpine, and then was appointed as in 1994 as our regional I&E person, the same role that Janet Millick fills today, that is helping us out with the meeting here today. He was appointed to that position in 1994. He did that until 2001, when he became a game warden and a regional access coordinator for the Casper region. Did that for about 10 years, and then in 2011 was promoted to be the Casper regional supervisor. Brian, too, like Rod, has a tremendous work ethic. The other thing that Brian has is he has certainly reached out over his career and his time, especially in this particular region, from the entire Casper region, from basically Casper to Sundance, and he has built some relationships that are just tremendous. He's known with a lot of credibility and with a lot of respect with outfitters, with landowners, with sportsmen groups, and also with just the general public. And if I had to pick one thing to talk about with Brian, it would be his ability to build first and maintain really positive relationships with our constituents. Thank you very much for your service, Brian. We're also, I just told Rod this over there, we're looking forward to your next service award. And congratulations to Brian Olson.
I wonder how many times in a year I get this picture taken.
Hey, Brian, get one with your family. They're out there proud of you.
Mr. Bibby? Come on. When somebody want to talk, what's the blue sheet you got?
I got a whole bunch of stuff. Once we get into it, we got one on chapter 44, one on hunting technology. It's on the same tab, but he wants to talk on different things.
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission, Director Talbot. Just two agenda items for authorization to acquire or dispose today. The first one is the Sunlight Basin Wildlife Habitat Management Area land exchange. The commission granted authorization to proceed on this project in March of 2018. The Sunlight Basin WHMA is located approximately 40 miles northwest of Cody, and includes two campgrounds that are available for public use May 1st through December 15th. The owner of the adjacent property, Holding Sunlight Ranch, conducted a survey that showed portions of the campgrounds are encroaching onto their property. And the survey also showed a small cabin owned by the Holdings in this small area here that is also encroaching onto commission-owned property. So an analysis concluded that a land exchange would be the most viable option to clean up the boundaries. An appraisal was conducted and determined that the difference in value between the 10.52 acres that would be going to the Holdings property versus the 8.86 that would be coming to the commission is $25,000, and that difference would be paid by the Holdings to the commission as a result of the land exchange. At this time, the department is recommending the commission authorize us to complete the land exchange with Holdings on the Sunlight Basin WHMA.
Any questions of Mr. Bibby? I have a motion to,
I would move that we let them proceed.
moved by Commissioner Byrd,
I would second that.
second by Mr. Schmidt. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. The second agenda item is related to the Medicine Lodge Wildlife Habitat Management Area. The commission was originally approached with a proposal to voluntarily abandon 8.42 acres of territorial water rights, and at that time, the commission asked the department to work towards a different solution. So just to give a little bit of background on that project again, in 2016, the department completed a stream restoration project at Medicine Lodge Creek and the Medicine Lodge WHMA through an independent contractor. The goals for restoration were stabilizing the channel, restoring aquatic habitat, reconstructing irrigation headgates, and to provide flood control within the state park areas to ensure public safety during high flow runoff periods. To accomplish this, an overflow channel was constructed to convey high flows away from the state park campsites and enhance erosion control. In addition, a number of oxbows along Medicine Lodge Creek were cut off from the main channel, creating 3 distinct wetland ponds. These ponds are located along the southerly portion of the project on commission-owned lands. At this time, the department has come back and discussed a different type of petition with the SEO, and due to the construction of the overflow channel and the 3 wetland ponds, it is the SEO's opinion that a certain amount of evaporative loss is taking place with the construction of those structures. The department has worked cooperatively with the SEO's office to find an alternative solution, and at this time it would contain these 4 components. We would detach 3.1 acres of the 25-acre wick-wire ditch irrigation right and change that use from irrigation to mitigation. We would update the location of the acres irrigated by the wick-wire ditch from the blanket description to those actually irrigated. We would move 3.72 acres of water right from the wick-wire ditch to the Anthony Ditch in order to irrigate the field directly south of the state park to accurately reflect existing conditions, and we'd move a portion of the 1984 Commission irrigation right onto the state park. So rather than voluntarily abandon any of these rights, the department is proposing that we change the 3.1 acres or 0.04 CFS of water to mitigation for the overflow channel and through wetland ponds, which is the main component of the petition. So this time the department is recommending the commission vote to authorize the department to submit the petition with these components to the State Board of Control with the provisions stated.
Any questions, Mr. Bibby? Mr. Crank?
Mr. President, can you give us an idea, 0.04 CFS of water? Someone described that for me as what could run through 2 garden hoses at one time. Is that, can you give us an idea of what that is?
Mr. President, Commissioner Crank, I think that's a fairly accurate statement. It's very little water.
It's a little.
Commissioner Culver.
It's a little less than 18 gallon a minute.
Less than 18 gallons per minute.
Very minimal loss of our territorial water right.
Mr. President, Commissioner Crank, that is correct. And functionally speaking, does not affect how we operate the area at all.
I appreciate Commissioner Crank and Commissioner Culver's due diligence on this. It's very important in this day and age with the water that they've followed up on this, and appreciate your work. Any other questions of Mr. Bibby? Do you have a motion on this item?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Crank, second by Mr. Culver. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Phipps?
Morning, Mr. President, Commissioners, Director Talbot. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Ms. Sue Dunn, the CEO for the Donor Alliance. She's part of the Organ, Eye, and Tissue Donor Task Force that was appointed by the past legislative session, and they were appointed to explore ways to increase the number of donors in Wyoming. The task force identified their major challenge is to provide opportunity for potential donors to opt in to the Organ, Eye, and Tissue Donation Program. So their chairman, Mr. Phil Nicholas, he couldn't be here today. He had conflicting engagement, and so I'd like to introduce Ms. Sue Dunn.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, Mr. President, members of the Commission, and Director Talbot. I'm Sue Dunn. I'm CEO of Donor Alliance, and we're the federally designated organ and tissue procurement organization for Colorado and most of Wyoming. The counties of Lincoln, Sweetwater, and Uinta are covered by the organ procurement organization out of Salt Lake City, known as Intermountain Donor Services, and I'm here presenting on their behalf as well. Just as a note, I grew up in the Black Hills in South Dakota and lead in a hunting, fishing family, and my grandfather served on the South Dakota Game and Fish Commission back in the 40s and 50s. I do want to ask your indulgence. We are, as Donor Alliance, waiting for a call actually to see if we've won the National Malcolm Baldrige Award for quality. So if my phone rings with a 202 area code, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Raya O'Neill, to fill in for me. So we've been on this quality journey for 10 years. So it's a big phone call today to be if we're on the national award. I'm here today to share an idea that was presented, as Greg said, to the Wyoming Organ, Eye, and Tissue Donation Task Force. The task force met at the end of September to assess ways to improve organ and tissue donation in the state of Wyoming. And the most innovative idea that we heard out of the 12 or 15 that were presented was what the Organ Procurement Organization in Minnesota, North and South Dakota has done, which is to link the opt-in registry process to the hunting and fishing license process within the state of Minnesota. In your packets and on the screen, you'll see the presentation that LifeSource put together. And because of time today, I'm only going to quickly go through about 6 slides, and you should have access to this packet as well. And in the packet is a little bit about Donor Alliance and the actual process for being on the donor registry. So as I move forward, LifeSource is a lot bigger service area than we are, but we are 3rd in the country in terms of geography. And Minnesota started this in 2016 with starting a new tradition for the hunting and fishing community to register as a donor when they would get their fishing license online. And the way that the opportunity presented itself, you can see here, was it was carried by a House representative back in 2016. And a little bit about the process here. Sorry. And I think what's most significant is here how the launch with the fishing opener is when the program went live. And because hunting and fishing in particular here in the state of Minnesota, is such a family and friend-oriented activity, same as it is throughout the country, you can see here that they link the idea of creating a new family legacy beyond hunting and fishing into registering to be an organ and tissue donor as well. And this is some of the collateral material that they used. You can see the outcomes here very briefly, very significant. Year over year in terms of the number of registrants, went from 799 up above 27,000 that had joined the registry. And certainly one of the goals for Donor Alliance is to continue to reach out to the population that you see here in blue. And across the bottom you can see the age that goes from down in the teens up to 90s. And at least in the Minnesota population, they still have hunters well above 90 who actually have also signed up on the registry. But the bulk of the population that you see there is from the 20s into the 40s. And then the long-term impact, again, you can see 17 over 18. And this is an avenue to get on the donor registry beyond the driver's license. And more than 98% of individuals join the donor registry through the Wyoming Driver Services so that you have a heart on your driver's license here in Colorado. So this is a way for us to reach more Wyomingites as well as to increase the numbers on the donor registry. Currently, Wyoming sits at number 10 in the country with a very respectable rate of 60% of all licensed drivers and ID holders are on the donor registry, and we're continuing to look for ways to increase those numbers so that at the time of death, that the Wyoming generosity can benefit those who are in need here in Wyoming as well as throughout the country. And there is a packet about Donor Alliance in your packet. I have a call from 202, and I'm going to turn it to Raya to answer your questions. So thank you very much. I'll let you know.
Do you guys have any questions for us about the registry? Initially, we're presenting this as an idea, just to have a link to the registry website on the Game and Fish site. That would be a great first step. Of course, Minnesota took it even a step farther and integrated the registration page through the hunting and fishing licenses, and they did that through legislative action.
Mr. Bibby, I know our whole computer system, what would it take to do that? Or
Mr. President,
25 words or less.
what we were looking at is to explore some options and maybe get a starting point on establishing the link to our Game and Fish homepage. And, you know, that would be an additional avenue for the donor task force and our consumer base there. That would probably be the minimal amount of computer programming up front, and you know, stay out of the system side for our licensing. One of the concerns that we had is we don't want to collect any donor information, so it would be a link that would go straight to the National Registry. We wouldn't have any responsibilities for you know, who opted in, who didn't, and what that data may or may not be. So right now, you know, probably just a link on the homepage, Mr. President.
Mr.
Any
President,
questions? Okay.
I'm sad that Phil Nicholas isn't here today, but I have to tell you one real quick Phil Nicholas story. So I had a pretty significant car crash in December 2016, maybe. And I was in intensive care in Denver. Phil Nicholas was dying. Phil was dying of liver problems in Laramie at the time. So I got a text from my friend Phil Nicholas. It shows how sick both of us probably are, but Phil texted me and said, "I get dibs on Crank's liver." And it was the first time I laughed after all that I went through. So Phil, you know, is a great sponsor for you in the state of Wyoming. So, but he does send horrible texts, dibsing your liver if you die. So.
Thank you for sharing that story with us. He is very passionate, and it is a blessing to have him bring this to the light in the public, that it's a need to touch more Wyomingites with the information.
We need to take any action, or?
I think we're just gonna investigate it and move forward, so I think so.
All right.
What did you say, Director Talbot?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, I think that based on what I hear here, and President Anselmi asked if we needed to have a motion, I think we can proceed as recommended by the department if that's supported by the commission.
I agree.
You okay with that?
Yes.
All right, Greg.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Jennifer, good morning.
Good morning.
She always has great movies, so get it going here. Here we go.
Good morning, Commission President, members of the Commission. I'm here to present Chapter 44, which is the regulation that governs our licensing. At this meeting, we're going to talk about basically two major changes that came out of the legislature through which are the mountain goat and then license expiration dates, one out of the House and one out of the Senate. The other two minor things we're going to talk about is assessing credit card fees and other minor grammatical edits to Chapter 44. House Bill 11, Enrolled Act 11, limits the number of big and trophy game animal licenses. And in here, this basically gave the department and the commission authority to look at the number of licenses allocated for mountain goats specifically. And so that's what we're going to be looking at as a change for in Chapter 44. Under this, the information in blue is the new proposed changes to Chapter 44. Mountain goat has a regulation split between non-residents and residents that is 75% available to residents. Traditionally, we've offered one type in the mountain goat, which was a type 1, and those licenses had been a once-in-a-lifetime license, and this change allows for a new type, which is a type A, which would no longer have the limitation on just